IoT RAN is a radio access network. It's how your thing connects to the outside world. Although with a sideline that actually, if you can use a wire, maybe you should. They're cheaper and they work a lot better. Radios are rubbish and complicated and all sorts of horrible things. So presuming you do need to use a radio, then there are a load of slightly different but also slightly similar radio architectures. So if you have a little connected valve on a pipeline out in the middle of Alaska, then there's probably no local infrastructure at all. So maybe you're going to backhaul over satellite. You're going to have some kind of hub. It's the satellite network, but there's some kind of hub, and then there's some kind of back end way off in the internet somewhere. If you're a washing machine in somebody's house, actually the architecture is really similar. You might have a GSM modem, because that's simple-ish and ubiquitous and so on, and you've got to backhaul via that to some kind of hub into the cloud, and off you go. If you're a connected security camera, then actually the architecture is really similar. It might be Wi-Fi to a router in somebody's house and then back into the cloud. But it's that sort of the first hop that we're going to talk about, the radio hop, the edge network, if you like. So I think I've said all those already, so we'll just zip over those, except that this one is a little bit different, the connected camera, because it's probably got some processing power. And so that has a few slightly different constraints. It's more like a normal computer connected to the internet than the other two, which are very simple, very low power, very resource constrained. And I'm not going to talk about this one very much, partly because it's not my area of expertise, and partly because you're probably going to stick it on Wi-Fi anyway, so you don't need to listen to me. So we'll think about things like that a little bit more. Some real things, so TTP, the Technology Partnership, we are an engineering and product development consultancy. We do all sorts of different things. These are a few, there might be one that comes up there in a minute, a few sort of Internet of Things that are real, that are deployed. So the top one over there is shelf-edge labels for supermarkets. Some big French hypermarkets use these. We'll come back and use that as a case study in a minute. The next thing down, it's hard to tell what sort of scale that is, but it's about the size of 2 D-cell batteries. It's a pH monitor for cows' stomachs. So you put every 10th cow in your herd has one of these. When it goes to be milked, the thing gets red, and you can control what additives you add to the grass to control the milk yield. And so that's been out for a while, but that's a sort of a real application. It's a little bit different, and actually the radio is identical to the shelf-edge labels. So there's a lot of, although the applications are really different, there's a lot of commonality in the edge networks in the RAN. If it came up, there'd be another one here, which is a streetlight controller, which is a sort of hybrid network. It's got GSM down to a street, and then Zigbee that hops along streetlights. And again, that's deployed in hundreds of thousands, if not a few more by now. Oh, there it is. I don't know why that came up second. Anyway, that's a streetlight controller. So we're thinking about the edge network, but we're thinking about it with a slight security twist today, because we're here. And there are some really quite unpleasantly conflicting requirements when you start to do that. If you are a small sensor on a pipeline in the middle of nowhere, you might want to send a few bytes of data a week, maybe, if you're sending a lot. But if you want to have something reasonably secure with that, you might want to do key exchange. You might need to send tens of bytes, and you might need to send them down to the sensor as well as just back up from the sensor. If you want to do firmware upgrade, you might need to send tens of kilobytes, and that places all sorts of different requirements on the radio network. So if you could be uplink only and really low data rate, that's great, because it uses what little energy and size you've got, so size is battery life, what little energy you've got available for exactly what you really want. If you have to do bidirectional, there's a load of timing that comes in, a lot more complexity, which is power consumption, which is cost, basically. Range is similar, actually. If you want long range, you have to put, and forgive me for wandering off into communications for a moment, but you have to put a lot of energy into each bit to make it get through. You can put it in with coding, you can put it in by transmitting more loudly, but you've got to put it in. And that means either you pay the price in data rate, so you send fewer bits and use energy, or you pay the price in battery size and your thing gets bigger or doesn't last as long. Long range and small is sort of similar to low power, except that low frequencies are often better at long range. So you might prefer 868 or 433 meg versus 2.4 gig, which means the antennas are bigger. So you have all this sort of conflicting to do. The security is pushing you one way, your sort of commercial requirements are pushing you the other way, and you need to find a sort of comfortable spot in the middle where you can make a suitable set of compromises for what you need to do. So we'll just get a non-exhaustive survey of what sort of radio networks can you have. Then over at this end, so this is sort of normalized range along the bottom here. This is sort of link, well, that's link budget really, but we'll call it range here. And this is performance, so how much data can you squirt through the thing? So this corner is easy. So this is short range, low data rate. Loads and loads of ways to do that. So many that it's not really interesting. This corner up here is either really hard or really specialized. So you can have fast, long-range microwave backhaul links, but they're point-to-point. So you need to align them carefully, and they're expensive. In the middle, there's loads of interesting things happening. So there's a few common things at this end. Wi-Fi, I guess you're pretty familiar with that. Bluetooth, Zigbee. Those are great going around a house, maybe around a building like this. Great, that works beautifully. As you go out a little bit further to sort of a regional-sized network, if you want to cover London or you want to cover the south of England, then you're looking at rather different networks. So either you could have someone else's network, so all of those things, LTE, GSM, LoRa, Sigfox, whatever on-ramp is called now, Ingenue. There's loads of things there where someone else will provide the network for you. And if they cover the area you're interested in, that's brilliant. Off you go. You pick one according to how much you want to pay for it, what the data rates are like, and a few other things we'll come on to talk about in a minute. Down at this bottom end here, where you really are very low data rate, then there are some rather more specialist networks like LoRa and Sigfox. Sigfox is really low data rate, lovely and simple, nice and long range. LoRa gives you a bit of flexibility. So you can have, depending on the network operator, what they're willing to provide, you can have really long range down here. But you can also do a few kilobits a second, and you can do it with the same hardware. So you might be able to, you can scale your data rate, maybe even according to the deployment of that particular thing. So it can be adaptive. That's great. Getting even more specialist over here, we've got some satellite providers. There are others, but I'm most familiar with these two. So here you can have worldwide coverage, and with Iridium it is really worldwide, right up to the poles. So if you have a remote sensor, that sort of thing, these are wonderful, because the infrastructure is worldwide and it's there already. So if you want to measure, what's a good example? Then a friend of mine is using Iridium at the moment to measure movement of glaciers in Antarctica. So there really is no infrastructure. He has to drop them out of an aeroplane because you can't get there. So there's that sort of thing. That fantastic worldwide coverage. So how do those fit into the categories we've talked about a little bit before? Then simple, badly connected, if you like, things down here. A big set in the middle of probably mostly consumer things, although if you want to cover a factory, brilliant, that works. And then there's the higher bandwidth things up at the top. And I said I'm not really going to talk about that, so we won't talk about that too much. A lot of other constraints are about who provides the network. So we talked about where, right? Do you need the back end of nowhere? Do you need here? Do you need Cambridgeshire? Something like that. Who will provide the infrastructure? So for something like Sigfox, you have to go with their infrastructure. There isn't the option to provide your own. And so there you are saying that, great, I'm going to buy modules, I'm going to use your service, I'm going to use your back end as well. Other things are sort of half and half house. So if you use LTE, if you use GSM, then they provide the transport layer, if you like. You can put your own back end on. There are other providers from whom you can rent or buy IP for backends. So to say, if you have a medical device, then there are a load of particular constraints on how you store your data and things. You can rent in service to do that. How many devices do you need to support? So if you're doing a house, if you are smart light bulbs and switches, then one network might be a house worth. So you need to support of the order of maybe 100 devices. If you're doing an entire factory and you want to do sensing on every bit of every machine, you might be up at the thousands. If you're going to do the whole world, you might be up in tens of millions on your network, or billions. And depending on the architecture, that could be on a single network. So how you move through here just sort of determines or pushes in and out some of the possible choices. Other things that you want to consider are, where do you get all of these layers? So if you've got an application, so there's something you want to do, something you want to measure, let's say, then you're thinking about these blue bits at the top and the bottom. Here's the thing, and then somewhere magically all those results get over to the other side and I can do cool things with them. All those things in the middle need to come from somewhere. And again, you can provide them yourself. Perfectly possible. You can do a completely custom development, radio PHY upwards, all the way to a server that keeps the data. People do that, all sorts of good reasons to do that. Probably you don't want to do that, though, unless you've got a really good reason. Probably what you want to do is you want to buy in as much of this as possible, because this stuff in the middle is necessary but not what makes your business interesting. So here are you, top and bottom. Then go with, I'm going to use Sigfox again as the example. Right, you can buy that, you can buy that. The connection, provisioning, billing, data storage, authentication comes with the service. So this is a pretty compelling reason to choose something like that if you don't need to do anything particularly magic there, if your particular piece of magic can go top and bottom. So let's talk a little bit about security particularly. Then all this huge space of different networks, different applications, and so on. Actually, how secure do you need your particular application to be? Do you need every change you make to make it more secure comes at a cost. And so you need to find a comfortable balance between, we'll do all of these things, and it will cost us this. Now we need to have a bidirectional network that can do maybe kilobits a second, where actually our measurement data was only a few tens of bytes a day. So that's firmware upgrade particularly. Or can you actually just do the few tens of bytes and you'll pay the price in, I can't do firmware upgrade. Either it never happens or I have to send someone to do it. There are networks where that is probably a valid answer. So to sort of illustrate those compromises a little bit, I thought we'd talk about two really contrasting examples. The first one, shelf edge labels, right? Actually, if it breaks, nothing disastrous happens. So it's really cost sensitive. A single supermarket might deploy thousands. They need to last for probably 10 years to be reasonably cost effective. But the gateway half, the bit that controls the label, can be relatively expensive, and it can be physically secure. So it can be locked up in the back of the supermarket. There are particular attacks that you care about in this case. So we don't really want someone to be able to bring their own label into the shop with the display set to say whatever they like. Say, I'm going to have all those boxes of beer at 50p. Here's the label that says so. That's easy enough because we can make it tamper evident. So that's a packaging problem rather than a network problem. So we'll discount that for the moment. There are some regulatory requirements. So if the label on the shelf is wrong, the supermarket can be fined. Clearly they're keen to prevent that, or at least stop it happening. So that's a sort of a network attack where I could be sitting in the car park, I can see the transmission coming over there, I can decode it, understand it, and send my own to overwrite what would be displayed on the label. So we need to protect that. We need to protect also just being able to read the data off the network can have an impact to the supermarket's business. So that means that a competitor can very easily scrape their pricing, and price matching deals at the supermarket are generally loss-making, so you're really keen to make that difficult. Exactly how difficult scales according to how much money you lose, but you need to make it difficult. It shouldn't be trivial. So modify a stolen label, so I talked about that, but we didn't talk about, okay, so I've stolen a label, and now I can extract the network credentials from it. Because remember, this is a really cheap device. It's not going to have any trusted elements. If you spent 50 cents for the micro, you'd be spending a lot of money. So it's really, really cheap and quite nasty. So what can you do about it? Well, you can have per device keys. That's something of a mitigation, so I can extract the keys for that one. That lets me access the network as that device, which is it's not great, but it does mean that I can't use those credentials to set up a different label. the other case where we could sniff information off the air, change competitors' prices to match, then some encryption over the air protects us there. And you probably can't rely on the network transport's encryption because either there's not a huge amount of headroom available to do it. So if you've only got a few bytes, then doing a key exchange in the beginning is difficult or slow or costs you a lot of energy, none of which you really want. So you're probably going to have to provision some keys at manufacturing time. But you can encrypt the network traffic on a device-specific way so that you can compromise one device at a time, not a whole supermarket's worth and not the whole installed base of devices. The other important thing to mention is that these attacks on the radio network are limited in geographical scale by the range of the radio. So if I'm in the supermarket, I can affect the radio link. If I'm here and the supermarket's a mile away, I probably can't. Now, that's not a total panacea, because if I can get into the radio network once, I may be able to escalate my access up and up and up and get something much more persistent. But it does limit the attack surface quite considerably. You need to be there, physically there. So it doesn't scale like attacks on the back end do, where if I'm here, I can access the back end from anywhere, and off we go. So a rather different device. So we've talked about a really cheap, really fairly nasty device, actually. What's the minimum you can get away with on a device? Well, what happens if, well, in this case, if that's banned, if you're not allowed to do that? So if you need to be more secure by regulation or because you have some more sophisticated threats to deal with, what can you do? Now, you've heard a load of things about what you can do in the hardware. And what can you do in the radio link? Well, you have the same sort of attacks, reading data off a stolen device, or sniffing it off the air. But whereas previously we might have tolerated sniffing the information for one transaction to one device, here we can't. And we need to protect the network against fake data. So we need to be able to protect against injections into the radio network, or from the radio network extracting data from the back end. So what can we do about that? Actually, it's pretty similar. We're going to encrypt the data as soon as we get it. Don't rely on the transport layer because it might be unwrapped in an intermediary before it gets to your back end, which hopefully you trust. Per node keys again. So everything is separated as much as you feasibly can. Don't let the user control what networks to connect to. So if your medical device is something that's worn on a person, if it comes into the home, don't let it connect to this potentially untrusted Wi-Fi network. So even if you use Wi-Fi as your backhaul, whitelist what you connect to. And here you really must have key replacement and you must have firmware upgrade. Whereas for some of the simpler devices, you might get away without it. Here you absolutely can't. All right. So, belted through a little bit quickly, but that's okay. The interesting thing here is there's a massive range of possible devices with a really different set of requirements for their radio networks. Are they worldwide, tiny bits of data, local, high data rate, some combination of the two? Attacks are limited in scale, so you do need to be within radio range of the device to attack it. And your choice is probably driven by one of these things instead. So you might have to compromise on some of those to get a network that actually works. So if you need the range and the cost provided by a very low cost, very low power, very low data rate system, you might well be stuck with the very low data rate system. And you need to make some compromises to allow that to work at all. All right, thank you very much.